maybe he doesn't want the American people, all of you watching tonight, to know that he's paid nothing in federal taxes, because the only years that anybody's ever seen were a couple of years when he had to turn them over to state authorities when he was trying to get a casino license, and they showed he didn't pay any federal income tax. So
that makes me smart.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. Donald Trump continues to withhold his tax returns. He says it's because he's being audited and has been every year since at least 2002, though he has yet to produce any proof that such an audit is taking place. Well, the New York Times got a hold of Trump's 1995 tax returns. The revelation? Donald Trump quite possibly could have avoided paying a dime of federal income taxes for 18 years. Trump claimed a $916 million loss in 1995 after poorly managing his businesses in the early 90s. Because he declared that hefty loss, the Times found that the Republican nominee could have taken advantage of portions of the country's income tax code that are particularly helpful to wealthy filers. Specifically, rules that would have allowed him to use that $916 million loss to cancel out an equal amount of taxable income over an 18-year period. The Trump campaign responded in a statement that neither confirmed nor denied the notion that he did not pay federal income taxes for 18 years. Quote, Mr. Trump is a highly skilled businessman who has a fiduciary responsibility to his businesses, his family, and his employees to pay no more tax than legally required, unquote. The unsigned statement went on to say, Mr. Trump knows the tax code far better than anyone who has ever run for president, and he is the only one that knows how to fix it. The campaign also said that Trump has paid, quote, hundreds of millions of dollars in federal, state, and local taxes over the years. But we don't know that for sure because Trump has refused to release his tax returns, unlike every presidential candidate since 1980. The New York Times could not determine that Trump definitively did not pay taxes for 18 years because it only obtained his 1995 returns. It's only October 2nd, 36 days before Election Day, and Donald Trump still has not released his tax returns, nor has he proved that there is an audit preventing him from doing so. Smart? Here with me now is Joan Walsh from The Nation, and joining us from D.C., Washington Post columnist Jonathan Capehart, Michelle Bernard, president of the Bernard Center for Women, Politics, and Public Policy, Washington Post columnist E.J. Dionne, and David Cay Johnston, author of The Making of Donald Trump. Thank you all for being here. And David Cay Johnston, I'm going to go right to you on that. Smart or not smart, Donald Trump potentially not paying taxes for 18 years?
Well, we're going to find out what people think about someone who says he's worth $10 billion not paying. And it's more likely to be the last 40 years because 4 years before this, Trump had what are called net operating losses. And all of his losses are deductible because of the way he organized his finances. If you and I had had losses in the stock market, we were limited to $3,000 a year against our salaries or business profits or other income. But Trump did this, I'm sure, under something called Section 1231, which is an area full of abuse and cheating that I've exposed for going back, I don't know, 17 or 18 years that the government does nothing about. It also raises a real interesting question. How do you lose $915 million in a rising real estate market if you're the great real estate genius?
Yeah, and Michelle Bernard, you know, you look at the losses that Donald Trump is reporting in that $916 million losses. You're talking about $25.5 million from the Trump Taj Mahal, $43 million from the Trump Castle Casino, $34 million from the Trump Shuttle, that airline. These are the businesses that sort of made Donald Trump's sort of public persona, casinos, airlines. You know, what does it mean? You represent a lot of businesswomen, that you work with. Is this normal business to just lose this much money but still be really, really rich?
Well, it is not normal business, and it is particularly not normal business if you are someone who claims to be the greatest businessman ever. And I would say that a lot of women-owned businesses have to be looking at this and asking the question, is this how Donald Trump would run the country? Would the United States begin to declare billions of dollars in losses every year under a Trump presidency? But, you know, even more important, Joy, when you look at this, one of the things that I have to think about for people who are what I call the others, people who are women, people who are African American, ethnic and religious minorities, people for whom white male voters are looking at as people who are taking something away from them. You really have to begin to question and look at, is it people of color? Is it people who are women? Is it, government policies, for example, affirmative action policies that are undermining or hurting the American public? Or are they tax laws that favor people like Donald Trump and allow someone who is incredibly wealthy by any metric to be able to not pay taxes for anywhere from 20 to 50 years? Is that what's really hurting you? And is that the type of thing that people should be looking at when they say we need to make America great again? I would argue that it is people who are not white males are not the enemy. It is the tax code that allows Donald Trump to not pay taxes over a 50-year period. Possibly that is the enemy.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly puts a new tack on makers versus takers, doesn't it?
Yes.
Let's play Steve Cortes, who is a Trump surrogate, who we are happy to have on this program from time to time. This is Steve talking with Alex Witt earlier today about this very story. Take a listen.
Says don't hate the player, hate the game. And the game is rigged, and it's crony capitalism out of Washington, D.C., and the tax code, I would argue, is Exhibit A in that rotten system. And Mr. Trump wants to smash the current tax code.
Joe, and I refer to it often. You wrote a terrific book called What's the Matter with White People, where you talk about, some of the anger of working class white Americans who benefited from the New Deal, who benefited from all these government programs, but who have this sense that, well, brown and black people are takers. They're taking my money, they're taking my tax money, and they're lazy.
They're taking my job.
Right. Why is it that somebody like Steve Cortes could turn around and say, hey, it's great that a rich guy's a taker?
Right, because the rich guys have kept the tax code just like this. Other people have wanted to change the tax code. The work of the great David Cay Johnston has shown us all the ways that the tax code is A, rigged for people like Donald Trump, and B, rigged by people like Donald Trump. So the notion that Donald Trump is the only man who can fix it is completely preposterous. I also want to point out this idea, they have not said this isn't true.
Right.
They might turn to that because they will do anything they need to when they start. Tomorrow morning we might be hearing that. But the great thing, Donald Trump is a very lucky man, because all he has to do to make this story go away is show us his tax returns that prove that he did pay taxes over the last 18, 20, 40 years. So if he's in trouble, he can do that, Joy. I hope he does.
But he won't do it. EJ, you have this narrative coming out of Trump world that, so what? If he's rich, he's a businessman, therefore almost anything he does is okay. Where does that come from, particularly from broke people, quite frankly?
Well, there are a couple of things here. First, I wondered when I saw this story this morning if the Trump people wouldn't be grateful for this news story, because so many people were focused on the danger of having a president who wakes up at 3 in the morning and starts tweeting. And it's been a pattern in this campaign that Trump scandals come at you so fast and furious that none of the individual scandals ever is given time to take hold for people to think about before you move on to the next one. I think the second thing is a decay, a rise in cynicism and a decay in the idea that, wait a minute, if you want to lead the country, shouldn't you want to pay something in taxes to support the government? And I think that we've become so cynical about government, there is an attitude that the government doesn't work, that the Trump people can run this argument, well, he's just being smart. But here's where I think this story could really bite. Trump's slogan, and it goes to something Michelle said, Trump's slogan is Make America Great Again. His life has been make Trump great again and again and again, regardless of what happens to other people. And that New York Times story made clear that all around him, the people who invested in him, his employees, all kinds of people in the community just lost everything. The stock plummeted. And yet Donald Trump was able to walk away with a bundle of money subsidized by taxpayers. I think it's that narrative that people may eventually pay attention to and say, if he did that with his own holdings, what in the world is he going to do with our country?
Yeah, and Jonathan, I am amazed when I hear, we do a lot of MOSs. We go out and we talk to people on the street, man on the streets, and we talk to people who are Trump supporters, who are the little guy, right? They are the proverbial little guy, who don't seem to care that Donald Trump cheated people, that he didn't pay contractors, that he, those Polish workers that built Trump Tower, that tore down the Bonwit Teller building, didn't even get paid, exposed exposed wires they had to deal with. They don't seem to care that he's treated the little guy that's just like them so poorly. But now you have the fact that he's saying the federal government doesn't work. Well, he's been withholding, tax revenue from the federal government maybe for 40 years. Why does that not resonate with Trump supporters?
Because they just don't care. I think that particular subsect of the Trump supporter, they are so angry at the establishment, at the federal government, that they simply do not care. The guest you had on yesterday was another prime example from another perspective when it comes to Donald Trump's misogyny and his attacks on the Miss Universe. She couldn't care less about what Donald Trump was saying about another woman because she was very angry about her own personal financial situation. So I think in this case, if you were to ask those people on the street about these financial issues and whether they care, they'll most likely say no. But then if you were to ask them whether they care about Hillary Clinton's homebrewed email server, they'll be ballistic. They'll think that she's corrupt and shouldn't be anywhere near the White House. And I think that if you're going to apply that standard to her, then you're going to have to apply that standard to him. While what he did is legal, it certainly, I think, to a lot of people's mind, sort of morally repugnant, because we, at least at one time, held our presidential candidates to a higher standard. If you're going to govern this country, if you're going to hold the lives now of 330 million people in your hands, the American people need to be reasonably assured that you have their safety as the highest priority, but also you are not going to cheat the government that you are in charge of. And the story in the New York Times really should make people question whether somebody who hasn't paid taxes, as David said, possibly for 40 or 50 years, should that person be in charge of the federal government?
And David Cay Johnston, I'm going to come back to you because I want you to talk to, Jonathan brought up, the really lovely woman that we had on yesterday who was with Latinas for Trump, who was trying, mightily to sort of argue for supporting somebody who had been so blatantly misogynistic, particularly toward a fellow Latina, and where she kept coming back to, David, was that she wants a tax cut and that she's sort of putting blinders on, ignoring everything else he says and does because she feels that she and her family get a tax cut. Now, we don't know what her income bracket is, but can you just really quickly speak to, David, this is a guy who doesn't pay taxes. I think we've established that. It's the Mitt Romney standard. What would his tax plan actually do for the average person?
Very little. Donald's tax plan is very heavily weighted toward very wealthy people like himself, and he is, by any standard, a wealthy person. Like the Bush tax cuts, where 12.5% of the money went to 1 in 1,000 households, Trump would double down on that kind of thing. I do want to emphasize one point. We don't know that this is an honest tax return. We know it's his return because of the signatures that are on it, including his longtime tax guy. But we know that Donald has a long history of reporting two different sets of numbers. And to have this $916 million loss, I'd like to compare that to what he said in SEC filings, in New Jersey Casino Control Commission reports, and in other documents, because Donald has a long history of using one set of numbers here and another here to benefit himself. And we know from his 1984 tax return and 2 trials that were held that there are badges of fraud on his 84 tax return. So I wouldn't jump to that conclusion. And one last thing, he did pay some tax. In the state of New Jersey on his income, his total income, positive income for the year was $11 million. He did pay in the state of New Jersey about $96,000 of tax.
Yeah, and Joan, I am really sort of fascinated by this notion that people can hold at the same time these two sets of ideas. That Donald Trump is this incredibly, wildly successful businessman, but that he keeps losing money, that he doesn't seem to be able to make the sort of core businesses work. And I am fascinated by the fact that people can hold those two ideas at the same time.
Right. He's either incredibly incompetent and has lost all this money, or he's lying, cheating, and stealing in order to show losses and make other people hold the bag, whether it's the taxpayer or whether it's bankers or whether it's the small business men and women we know he's stiffed. And so I share your fascination, but I just want to say one thing about the woman you talked to and all of these Trump supporters.
Ileana Garcia was her name. Yeah.
Ileana Garcia and others. They love Trump because he is their liar and cheater and stealer, and he's going to do it on behalf of them. They believe the system is broken. They want someone to take it in hand, and they really don't care how he's accomplished it to date, as long as he's going to do it on their behalf. And that's tragic, but that's the way it is.
No, it absolutely is. We actually are out of time, but Joan, Jonathan, Michelle, and EJ will all be back later in the show. Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.